Welcome, everybody. So this is part 2 of our 2-part workshop on helping distressed and distressing students. You didn't have to come to, who came to the first one? Okay, so you didn't have to come to the first one to get something out of this one. Hopefully we designed it that way because we know that it's hard to kind of come to both pieces. But some of the feedback that we got from the first workshop was that we need to talk more about working with students who are disruptive in class, maybe not necessarily suicidal, maybe not necessarily, not necessarily the student who's going to, sorry, I just got a little distracted. So we really wanted to focus on how to handle those situations that might, you might need to engage a conflict, right? Does that make sense? So why are we here? So one thing that I did want to say is that I was telling my husband, who is a self-admitted curmudgeon, that I was doing this workshop today, and his response was like, just kick him out of class. Like, if they're not old enough to know what to do and how to behave, just get him out of here. So I'm wondering if any of you share that feeling, that yes, that these are students who, you know, maybe if they don't want to be there, if they don't know how to behave, then we shouldn't even be worrying about them. They will take care of themselves, and we should just ignore them. That is certainly one approach, and we will talk about that you have many choices in how you're going to handle these conflicts. Personally, especially given some of the things that we talked about in the first part of this workshop, you know, some of those students are also the students we need to be concerned about. So in my world, we don't want to just dismiss them. I also think that sometimes those are the students that need some intervention in order to get back on track, right? So I just want to put it out there that I think that for some people, for us to be talking about how to work with distressing students seems like are we coddling them even more? Are we trying to be extra nice to these students who are just plain annoying? So what I'm trying to do is open up the space, make this a safe space to talk about just the annoying student, okay? All right, so bottom line up front, distressing students require attention. That whatever the attention is that you're going to give them, they require some attention. That just ignoring what's going on isn't always going to be effective. You have choices in how you're going to resolve the conflict that might come up. We are going to encourage you to avoid power struggles, because generally, I just read a quote, would you rather win the struggle or get punched in the face, right? So you have to kind of decide if you want to engage the struggle. And then we have to practice assertive communication that, unfortunately, for most of us, communicating in a direct and assertive way does not necessarily work, okay? Because we haven't learned it, we haven't practiced it. It's not been we haven't been socialized to do it that way. And then authentic communication, we are going to make the argument that if you can communicate more authentically and assertively, which is, I think, more authentic, you're going to get less burned out. I mean, that's the basic bottom line, right? That this is all to help you do your job better for a longer period of time. Okay. Oh, I guess I didn't animate that correctly. So direct assertive communication works sometimes. Okay, so I'll also talk about the fact that you can be assertive doesn't necessarily mean they're going to change, right? Or they're going to do what you want them to do. So that is another important point to make.
And can I just jump in and interrupt you and just,
yes.
just to say that this will be archived, and so you don't have to furiously take notes.
Correct.
Okay.
And I will also say that some of the, 2 of the handouts I gave are just like a couple of the slides that have more interesting stuff than the rest of them. Okay, so you do have the slides that do require a little, that you might want to write down. I already printed them out for you, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So distressing students require action. So, you know, Sandy, I got to tell you that I'm like having so much trouble focusing right now. Can you just come over here for a sec so I can talk to you just real quick? You know, I don't know what was going on, but we kind of...
late. Sorry.
I know, but we talked about that it would be really important for all of us to get here on time. And, you know, I just want to let you know that I'm having trouble concentrating and focusing on the presentation at this point. So I'm wondering if you would be willing to kind of hang out with me after class and after the presentation and talk about it.
Fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thanks. Thanks so much. Okay. So the distressing action required some attention, right? Because I'm not lying. I was actually kind of distracted by what she did. And
she made me do it.
I did.
Saying.
We did discuss it ahead of time, but she was
Because
really
I saw
good at it,
some of
wasn't
you
she?
go, damn, really,
Yeah.
Sandy? Yeah.
Exactly. So this is the kind of thing that you get rattled in the moment, right? And I think when you get rattled in the moment, you're not really sure what to do. And what we're saying is that do something, right? Usually doing nothing is going to make you, that is what I've found personally and professionally, that is what's going to create that sense of resentment and that sense of like these students today, what are we going to do with them? And it builds over time. And then you truly do burn out, correct? So what we tried to model is, okay, this little interaction, all I was trying to say is that, that distracted me. We had talked about being on time. If you're not able, or, if you're not able to confront that person right then, or if it's not appropriate, like in front of the whole group, to make some arrangements for later, okay? So that's, again, like, we understand that may not be easy, but it can be practiced and you can get better at it, okay? Direct communication works. So what is your thought on how my direct communication with Sandy worked? Did it?
You got her to agree to stay after class.
Mm-hmm. She was pretty compliant, right? She was a pretty easy fix, right?
Well, let's see.
She made faces. Right, so how does that feel like in terms of did it work or not work?
Well, it felt like you got her to agree to stay after, but she thought it was really stupid.
Yeah, she wasn't happy with it, right?
Plus, we don't know if she's going to stay after.
Absolutely, right? So we can't predict if our intervention is going to have the outcome we hope for, right? What message how did the rest of you feel while I was talking to her?
Glad I wasn't late.
Exactly, right? I'm a stickler, right? So the rest of you, anything else? What were reactions from the rest of the crowd?
But it kind of creates this sense of fairness because, okay, you've told us not to be late, so you addressed it, okay.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that the issue also, I know that when I'm sitting, like when somebody does that, and usually it's a student who does it consistently that gets on our nerves, right? Like one time we're usually willing to kind of cut some slack, right? But when a student consistently comes in late, the other students are like, why won't she freaking say something, right? Mm-hmm. So you're creating this scenario where everybody then starts to feel tense, and then that's going to obviously impact the learning environment, right? That you're not going to be able to have this community of trust where we can speak openly. So I believe that what we're modeling is transparency. We're modeling, that I'm here for all of you and not just this one student, which is essentially what's happening when that one student is getting that kind of attention.
It levels the playing field.
Levels the playing field.
And I think that that's what students in a classroom want to see.
Right. So how about, did it feel, Sandy, how did you feel? I'll ask you. When I confronted you.
Embarrassed. Yeah.
Anything else?
And also, I think, embarrassed and, called out a little bit in front of my peers. Mm-hmm. But I think sometimes that's okay. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're behaving in a way, I mean, obviously getting, attention is not an issue, or I wouldn't come in and slam Teresa up against the, but, embarrassed and called out. Right.
So you felt some discomfort. Did you feel like, did I shame you? Did I make you feel?
No, I thought that you were respectful and just, and the thing is you talked about how it's affecting you in the class, mm-hmm. and not saying, your behavior is inappropriate and you're being rude and using sarcasm or any of those things that can make students feel, any of us feel, shamed or defensive. Mm-hmm. But you said, right. I'm still having a hard time with this, so we need to chat after class.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. Now, ideally, I would have said something more, even maybe more immediate, but the honest truth was that I was trying to go on, I was trying to get on with it, but it was still on my mind. Okay, so this is kind of my assertiveness 101 slide. So I've said now for years that if I could do one workshop for students, one workshop for, hello, should I slam it? One workshop for students, one workshop for faculty and staff. I just have to laugh because I'm
too late to sign up.
Not at all. We were just talking. They'll explain it to you later. And I'm chronically late, so I would never slam a student for being late because I'm often one who's later than the students. Anyway, so if I could give any workshop to all faculty, staff, and students, it would be an assertiveness workshop. Because I believe that we are supremely bad at assertive communication, particularly in the United States. I'm not familiar enough with lots of other cultures, but I think if you turn on the TV right now, what you're going to see is aggressive communication or passive communication. But when I ask students like what assertive communication looks like, or if they have any models in their lives of people who communicate assertively, they're like, well, yeah, my dad like usually gets his way. My dad usually gets his way. Or my mom's really a strong-willed person, so you know she always is telling us what to do. Or they can easily identify themselves as being passive, right? But this idea that two people communicate in an equal fashion, whoa, that's like mind-blowing to them, right? Like that's what's supposed to happen. So you can see that this is a very simple diagram, I think, but it means so much to me that if we're behaving passively, we are saying that I don't matter. My needs don't matter, my agenda doesn't matter. If we're behaving aggressively, we're saying the opposite. The other person's agenda doesn't matter, the other person's needs don't matter. But truly, this more, you know, what I would call a dignified interaction is where both of us have wants and needs. You know, we're not here to argue who's more important than the other, but we have to treat each other like equals so that we can come to some kind of agreement. Make sense? And I think if, again, like I said it last time, if you all can like become my little minions and model this behavior, we will be doing the students such a service. So this is not to say that you should not confront a student, but we're going to do it in a way that honors their humanity, right? So the top one was my, like, this is what I think of passive communication, and then
being aggressive when I came in.
Well, we had done a demonstration, yes. What, did that feel aggressive?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, in all honesty, I apologize. That I did kind of make you the butt of my joke there.
I saw that.
Okay. So, but it's true. Like, it can happen very quickly in an instant, right? Yes.
I'm just curious that sometimes I think in this navigation between passive, assertive, and aggressive, that sometimes assertive statements are seen as aggressive when you're not comfortable.
Exactly. So I will say that I typed that up there, the passive one, and I realize now that it's really an aggressive statement, isn't it? It depends on how you say it, right? Passive aggressive, which is just aggressive. I mean, that just means aggressive in a passive way. Aggressive in a quieter way, right? Or in a funnier way, right? But it is still an aggressive way.
Passive aggressive is still aggressive.
Still aggressive. It's still aggressive. Because I mean, think about that other diagram. Like, you're still making the other person less important than you being funny or you having the upper hand, right? But I think that would this be you know, my point was, okay, 3 times now you've said you've had this emergency. I'm just going to let it slide again. You know, certainly that's a choice, but, you know, I think a passive way is just kind of, I'm not going to engage this issue. Yeah.
Well, I think, like with that first one, it's sarcasm.
Yeah.
And so that can get lost from being direct with
Exactly.
the person.
Absolutely.
That creates another dynamic that the student can say, oh, you're just being whatever.
Right. So what would be like a more passive approach?
Ignoring.
Ignoring, absolutely, just withdrawing, right?
Or even just the end part, I hope he's doing better.
Yeah. Right. I hope he's doing
Because
that.
then you're really not addressing the issue that's bothering you, and then you're not being true
Exactly.
to yourself. And then
Exactly.
that's where that burnout, I think, would happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah. So maybe just that last line. I'll take it out, I promise. It was a moment of weakness on my part. Okay. But the aggressive is what I was saying earlier, right? Like what my husband was saying, if they don't want to be there, just leave. You know, like I'm the one, like this is my classroom. I don't need to bother with your BS. Just leave, right? So that's more aggressive. How about the assertive comment? Does that seem realistic, something you would say?
Because you're using I statements, you're talking about how it makes you feel, and but you're also addressing the issue. It's
Absolutely.
disruptive.
Absolutely. So, right, and I think the key is the I statement. Now, the I statement, I've worked with some couples, which is super hard work if you ever have to do it, I will tell you. And so we went over kind of assertiveness and I statements, and the girlfriend said, I feel that you're an asshole. And I was like, now, that is not how we use I statements, right? So the model for I statements is I feel, or when you do blank, the behavior, I feel blank. So this is the model, right? When you insert distressing behavior, I feel blah, 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 blah. right? Now we're not saying that every time you are going to be assertive, you have to use this exact sentence, but the point is you're taking ownership over what you feel. And again, like, I mean, Sandy and I, as we were preparing this, we were talking about, like, God, that is so much less exhausting for me than you're doing this and you're doing that and I can't control you and blah, blah, blah. But if I say, you know, over and over again, I feel just drained when you're not here, and then all of a sudden you show up one day and I have to kind of catch you up on the work, right? If you can honestly understand how I'm feeling about that, then we have a place to start, right? So I also want to emphasize that you have choices. Like when you are working at deciding to engage in conflict, and I want to emphasize that you can decide to not engage in conflict, right? That's definitely your choice as well. That, you know, you can say, I'm not going to deal with this. So this is a conflict resolution model that I learned way back in grad school. And I think this is so important because I think often we think of conflict as just like they're doing something wrong, their behavior is wrong, and I want to fix it. But most conflicts are a conflict between a relationship and a goal. And for some of us, for some of our goals are not very important, some are very important. Some of the relationships are not very important, and some are very important. Okay? Yeah.
I think social workers think about fixing things. I don't often think about, you just inserted that, I want to fix it. I don't think about that.
So what do you think about when a student is kind of in a aggressive state?
Potentially conflict. I'm more of that aggressive, why are you here? Why are you like that? I mean, I don't actually say that, but I'm thinking it. There's a lot of things I think that I don't say.
That's probably good. Yeah, I support that.
And that's the difference between me and my students.
Yeah.
Theirs is unfiltered a lot of times.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I have to I always think, am I an oak and will fall in the lightning storm, or am I a willow and will I bend? And so as the students, the wind is picking up or dying down and stuff like that, I'm not passive. I'm just more bending with the thing. Have you thought about this? Or is this the best solution?
So I would argue,
I'm not always trying to fix it. I'm trying to maybe recognize it and let them self-fix it.
So what I would argue, and anybody correct me if I'm wrong or jump in, that what you're doing is more assertive, right? So I'm also going to say that I think that there are, I don't think it's a secret that there are gender issues when it comes to being passive or aggressive or assertive, right? So when I talk to women in the counseling center, if they inch toward assertiveness from the passive realm, they feel like they're being aggressive. And if men feel like they're inching toward assertive, they feel like they're being passive.
I would say that's probably a good...
Right? And again...
A good scale.
Yeah.
Yeah. The minute I'm not, aggressive, I feel like, oh man, I'm giving up too much.
Exactly. And again, I think that has everything to do with the fact that we don't know what assertive really looks like. We don't really know what it looks
it's hard. The only thing I know assertive is that I really work at that in a marriage relationship. That's about the only relationship where I'm really trying to be treated as equal.
Well, so let's look at this, right? So what I'm hearing is that for you, that relationship is extremely important. And, depending on the goal, you're more likely to negotiate or to smooth. So my example is, so if the relationship isn't very important, and again, it's in a moment-to-moment dynamic. So if the relationship is not very important relative to the goal, I might withdraw or force. So for me particularly, I know this is a sensitive issue, but I would prefer that my children not die of childhood diseases, right? So I get them immunized. It's horrible. I have to hold them down. They're screaming. They're telling me I'm the worst mommy ever. It's a horrible experience. I don't like it, but I don't want them to die for measles, right? So in that moment, my goal is more important than my relationship with my kids. And so I have to force the situation, right? So sometimes the goal isn't very important, the relationship isn't very important. To me, I'm a very passive driver. Like, I don't care who, if you're at the four-way stop, I don't care who goes first. I'm going to withdraw because I don't need to have power over you and I don't need to get there first. So I'm generally going to withdraw from that situation, right? Just let you go first. If the goal is not important, relative to the relationship, I might smooth the situation. So for example, I would love it if my Thanksgiving table looked like the Martha Stewart magazine that I showed everybody the day before Thanksgiving, that this is what I want my table to look like. But I would prefer to have a good relationship with my mother-in-law for the rest of her life, right? So I smooth that situation, right? I say, oh, that looks great. This is exactly what I had envisioned. You know, thank you so much for helping. If the goal is very important and the relationship is very important, you know, for example, in my marriage, like I want also to stay married, but we have to manage our money, right? Like we have to decide how we're going to spend our money. So we have to do negotiations usually every month, right? Like, are we going to buy this thing that you want, or are we going to buy this thing that I want, or what are we going to put in? You know, we do a negotiation every month. And then somewhere in the middle here is compromise. So just as an aside, I got this like 13 years ago when I was in grad school. The class, to be quite honest, was not very good at all. But I remember this. And I remember this because I looked at this diagram and I thought, holy hell, I only used 2 of these conflict resolution styles. Can you guess which ones they were?
You use force and withdraw.
Smooth and withdraw.
Which one?
Smooth and withdraw. And I think for me, that was absolutely kind of a moment of like, wow, I was so socialized to either smooth every conflict or withdraw from the conflict. I was never, this idea that sometimes a relationship may relation to a goal may not be as important, totally novel concept to me. Totally novel concept to me. So this was kind of my first introduction to like, I have choices. Like I am constantly having to assess, like, is the goal more important than the relationship, vice versa, and then make some decisions about how to act. And that's really my point of this, right? So assertiveness is not like I always have to be engaging conflict, but it's how am I going to engage the conflict? When am I going to engage it? You know, what is the goal? What is the outcome I want from engaging it?
Well, and sometimes it means choosing your battles.
Exactly.
I mean, that's what it comes down to.
Precisely.
You know, and then I tell that with when I counsel students is like, okay, I get it. I get that you're bugged, or I get that you feel you were, you know, disrespected by the faculty or whatever, but choose your battle. Is this something you're going to really go to battle for, or is it something you can feel like, eh,
right?
You know.
And you know what we say is that if you have to have a relationship with somebody for, let's say, a semester, you know, that relationship may remain pretty high, of pretty high importance in relation to the goal. You know, you might need to smooth some things. You may not agree with the professor, or you may not agree with the student, but you might need to smooth that conflict. Is that making sense? So this is what I'm saying. So we're trying to avoid power struggles in general because they don't work, right? You know, you could end up getting your face punched in, right? And we want to avoid that. And moreover, from my perspective, I'm very student-centered. We want to help the student grow. You know, the issue isn't so much that we want to have power and we want the student to know that I'm in charge here, but we want to help them grow so that they can communicate with, you know, dignity when they get out into the workforce, right? So this is one of my new favorite books. It's by Robert Fuller, who was a professor at Oberlin, or he was actually, I'm sorry, the president at Oberlin for many years, and he's a like physics professor, isn't that what we decided? And he in his observations, he recognized that, you know, all incidents of isms, sexism, homophobia, racism, all of them were an issue of essentially rankism. So he calls rankism kind of the mother of all isms, in that there's somebody, there are 2 individuals, one gets somebodied and one gets nobodied, right? In those issues where sexism occurs, where homophobia occurs, where heterosexism occurs, rather, where all of those issues are about one person having a higher rank than the other, and that person abusing that rank, right? So one of the examples he gives is that just because I may have higher rank, it doesn't mean that I have to abuse that rank. So I may have power, and you know, my job is to use my power for good, not evil, right? So he's a physics professor, and every day he worked at Columbia. Every day he passed the same homeless guy. You know, they would chit chat every once in a while, and this homeless guy said, "I've proven all of physics wrong, and you know, I've written a 1,000-page diatribe on this, you know, fact." And so he said, okay, you know, I'm writing this book on rankism. I can't like just assume that he's wrong. Maybe he is, maybe he's a genius. I need to read this. So he takes it back to his office, he reads it, and he's like, the dude's wrong. You know, there's nothing based in science about what he's saying. So he takes it back and he says, you know, I think you're doing some really interesting work, but, you know, I have to tell you that there's no basis of, you know, this isn't scientifically, you know, sound. But I appreciate that, you know, you're having such great thoughts about this. So did he use his rank? Yes, he used his rank to say, I'm blocking, I'm not going to have my peers read this. I'm not going to, you know, have you submit it to a journal because it's not good. It's not sound. But do I have to shame you and reduce you to, you know, nothingness, maybe even by ignoring him or, you know, saying, you know, telling him he's ridiculous or whatever. So that was his example he gave. And I think it's really important for us as staff and faculty to recognize that we, whether we want to believe it or not, and we probably don't believe we do have power, we do have power over the students. You know, we are in an evaluation, you know, we can evaluate them, we can belittle them, we can, you know, in front of the class, we can humiliate them if we want to. So that is a choice. I'm asking you to not do that because this rankism, it's a cycle, right? So if I feel humiliated, I'm going to retaliate somehow, right? I'm going to put, you know, the rate your professor is going to be just really awful on you and you're going to be embarrassed, no one's ever going to take your class again, or worse, right? I will humiliate you back in class. And so it becomes a cycle, and again, is this what we want to model, right? So this is the intervention. So, right, so if I even stop the rankist behavior from beginning, then I'm going to create a different cycle. Does that make sense? So the intervention, you know, then results in somebody feeling heard, maybe feeling valued. And as we discussed in the first part of this, you know, sometimes those signs that students give us are really signs that I'm distressed, that I may, you know, just appear to be a jerk, but what I'm really trying to tell you is that I'm in trouble. Okay? So we want to practice assertive communication. So what we've done is we kind of came up with some scenarios on the 2 pages in the main handout. And we really tried to make them realistic because we wanted to evoke some emotion, right? So I'm thinking that, let's see, why don't we break up by tables again? So we'll have 2, you know, dyads, but if the people in the back and then the people in front just want to congregate. And kind of talk through the scenarios. And what we really want you to think about is, okay, what are the columns I have on there? What's the first one?
What might this mean?
What might this mean? So you might remember if you came to the first part, I said, you know, rather than asking yourself, or if you find yourself rather asking, what should I do? What should I do? What should I do with the student? What should I do about the situation? To ask yourself, what might this mean? What does this mean? Okay, so if you can kind of like hear between the lines, like what does this mean that the student is saying this? Okay, then decide, are you going to confront them? And then figure out what you're going to say. I'll put the little assertive communication thing up there. There. When you blah, 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 I feel blah, blah, blah. I didn't bring a list of feelings. I thought that would be too much. So what will you say? You know, kind of figure out what you would say, and then when will you say it? So are you going to confront them immediately in the moment? Are you going to wait, you know, ask for them to come to class? Are you going to email them? What are you going to do? Okay, so maybe we'll take about 5-6 minutes to do that, and then we can come back together. Okay. So if we can all come back, first of all, I'd love to hear if you all came up with your own scenario. Like, was there a separate scenario that you talked about? Who would like to start?
We did a scenario off the sheet.
Okay. And like I said, I really want to make sure that this is relevant to like maybe a situation you're going through now. So is there anybody like who would want to talk about, do you want to talk about one that you're
Well, so I'm sitting in on a class that Anne's teaching because I might teach it in the future.
Okay.
So it's been an eye-opening experience to be in with the students. And, you know, when I'm up front lecturing, we were talking about how you're in the moment, you don't notice what the students are doing. But I am so distracted by all the conversations that are happening around me and before she made them turn their computers, I see people shopping for guns, shopping for motorcycles, like while class is happening. Wow. I didn't know any of this was going on when I'm up front seeing a student with the computer open. So we were just talking about, and this is a class where she really encourages discussion, and then students don't stop discussing, and then they're getting off on a tangent, and we want them to discuss, but
right. So they actually, I mean, it's the students, some of them who end up having a side conversation are the students who are actually really interested in the course material, and they start out talking about the course material, but they don't stay there, and that's not something that I can tell that's going on.
Right.
And it's a classroom where you can't walk to the back and say, okay, I need to talk to you after class.
Right. So what is the goal that you're trying to, what would you like to see happen in those? Let's just kind of address the issue of one, I mean, because one was similar to the texting through class, right? Like if you're internet shopping, that to me is kind of the same, like I'm not engaged in class behavior. So what would be the goal?
Well, the goal is that at least that the students do not distract the other students. Okay. So that at least the students who are wanting to pay attention are able to pay attention. Right. And that's, I mean, if they're sitting there quietly without distracting anybody else, not paying attention, okay, that's their problem. But if they are distracting other students, then I want that to stop.
Right, great. So how important is that goal to you?
Yeah, it's pretty high.
Yep. And how important is it to you to maintain a relationship with the students who are not paying attention, who are distracting?
Well, it's much more important to me to maintain a relationship with the students who are paying attention.
Right. So for those students that you might have to confront, it sounds like relative to the goal of protecting the other students or creating an environment that those students can learn in, the relationship's not very important. Right. So this would be one of those, like, okay, I gotta confront this. Like, to me, that's what this says. Like, I gotta force the situation. I've gotta confront those students.
I thought I heard that she would probably withdraw or just ignore, and ignoring is like withdrawing, right? Don't you just ignore those students that are on their laptops? Not.
Oh, I don't let them have laptops in the class. So I mean, from the very first day, I said, no, you don't do it, and I draw attention to it. And
the goal of creating a learning environment for everybody, which is free of distraction, is more important than being nice about letting you.
No, because it distracts everybody behind you. If you're on your laptop doing who knows what, watching a basketball game or whatever it might be, that's distracting to everybody around you. So that I don't let them do that. But when they chit chat in the back of the class, that's much harder to control, especially when it's a class where there's some lecture, then there's some discussion time, then there's some lecture, and then there's some discussion time. They have a really hard time transitioning.
Shifting gears.
Yeah. And so, I haven't solved this problem at all. Nowhere near solving it.
Any suggestions? Yes.
Well, this situation that we were talking about, which is one that we've both come in contact with frequently, is student is whispering with friend throughout the class, which could be with a friend or just with somebody who's sitting next to them. And we've done different things, and we did talk about what it might mean. Cindy was talking about how in her one situation is the student has a particular learning style where she feels like she has to repeat everything that the professors just said in order to get it, and that brought down her anxiety. And in my case, I try to approach the situation as if I'm kind of naive and I expect that it's for a good reason that they're talking and chatting. And even if they're in the very back of the room, I'll stop what I'm doing and I'll call them out, but I'll ask, oh, did y'all have a question? Do I need to clarify something? You know, is there just assuming that that's why they're chatting? And sometimes it is indeed the case, and I can clarify what it is. At which point I say, please, always, if you want, you know, break in, raise your hand. I'm happy to clarify. But if they're just chatting, often they call themselves out and they, you know, look kind of rueful. Oh no, we were just chatting. And then, quite often, at least for the rest of that class period, they don't.
Exactly. That was enough. So I think that's great. How would you do that in a direct and assertive way? You want that slide?
You know, I'm like thinking, well, this really works for me.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily, you know,
why is that not direct and assertive?
Well, so all I would add, Sarah, is, hey, you know, in the back, I'm a little distracted by your conversation. Do you guys have a question? So they recognize how it's impacting you.
Naming the fact that this is distracting as well. Yes. Okay, so I could say, oh, I noticed that you were chatting back there, so I'm feeling distracted and need to break off from my lecture, but I wanted to see, is there something I can clarify for you, something like that?
Exactly. And I mean, do you see the difference? Like how it's like another human being is being impacted by your behavior. And I think over and over again when I talk to students, I mean, I don't know if people can agree, that when they're sitting in my office, they don't believe that their behavior is having an impact on somebody else. Yeah.
Well, and I, too, you know, I mean, for most of my career, I did in vocational counseling, employment kind of stuff. And coming here, I realized that people are not learning the soft skills. I mean, you know, they're getting the grades, they're getting the education, they're getting the expertise, but they don't know how to relate to people or talk to people or even understand how their behavior connects with the world. And so even though you're saying the same thing, it's teaching the soft skill that your behavior is distracting me. It's like it's an educational moment so that maybe they connect their behavior to a thing. It's like when you say your behavior is inappropriate. I think that there are some people that don't know what does that inappropriate even mean, or what's civil mean, or you need to be courteous. It's like your mother, you know, what'd your last maid die of? My mother told me that my whole life. What'd your last maid die of? Until I was like 20, I thought she was telling me to go on a diet. I had no idea it was to pick up my clothes. What'd your last maid die of? Okay, I was just like, all I knew was I was in trouble. I probably was eating too much crap or something.
Right. Exactly. Like, I mean, that they aren't necessarily making those connections. So I think your intervention is beautiful, right? It's saying, like, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps you were like, you know, going on and on about this amazing thing I just told you, or how amazing I am, but you're not teaching them your behavior is disrupting the class. Now, in your case, it's more than one person, right? Who may or may not be engaging in these conversations. So how would you use an I statement to address that?
See, I'm having a really hard time lecturing because I know that there's people who can't hear me because there's people in the back of the room talking.
And I, for one, I can guarantee you there's at least, 10% of your students who are going to be like, yes, she finally said something.
She does regularly tell them to stop talking.
I do.
And they stop for a little while.
Yeah, but it doesn't last
then they
very long.
start again.
Okay, so what would be a phase 2 intervention? Hang on one sec. Let's see if we can.
Well, to tell them I need to talk to them after class.
So
you did once threaten to have them separate them.
I did.
And they stopped the rest of the time.
They did, but then they, So I'm thinking now, like I should just at the end of class say, you know what, I need you to sit at the front of the room next time. But of course, then I'm displacing the kids who want to be at the front of the room because they don't like being distracted by the people in the back.
Right. I mean, so I mean, I guess the question for me is like, is it okay to tell the student that? I've really struggled with this because I don't want to displace the students who want to sit in the front, but like I'm at my wit's end about what to do. Do you have any ideas how I can kind of help you cut down on the chatter?
Yeah,
that's.
So again, being transparent, right? Like you are at wit's end, right? You're like, shut the F up, right? But how do you say that in a way that maintains their dignity? Yeah, Celeste.
That was absolutely what I was going to suggest is that ask them this is my dilemma here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have to go to, I'm really thinking that separating you guys or having you sit at the front, what are your thoughts about this?
Mm-hmm.
Just so that we can keep going with this and we don't have to deal with it every week.
Right.
I mean, just invite them into that, just like Junie did.
Yeah.
And then I think at some point it's okay to say, you know what, I'm done. I addressed it, I was assertive, I was polite, I was respectful, I invited you into the conversation, and you know what, Punkin, now I'm done.
Exactly.
You just need to go out because you're met.
Do that? You can tell students they have to leave and can't come back to your class?
Yeah.
If they're disruptive.
Yeah, that would be
I'm not teaching right now.
Classroom according to judicial.
Or Title V student code of conduct says they're not allowed to be disruptive in class. And you can ask them to leave.
So then if they kick them out.
You can kick them out, and you can call university police to physically escort them.
And when they go to student judicial affairs?
I didn't know that till about a year ago. But yeah, you're within your rights to do all of that.
Yeah, and I think the institution wants to see that you've made all of these steps and these efforts. We certainly don't want to see a bunch of people getting kicked out of classes.
Yeah, right.
But I also feel I think oftentimes instructors feel a little held hostage by behavior, and that's not fair either. And so there has to be a balance.
Right. What you're describing is that is when you withdraw from the situation. You know what? Your goal of helping the student learn and your relationship with that student neither of those are important to you. Withdrawing is appropriate. Withdrawing meaning you've done what you can, and now you're ready to say you can't be in my class.
This all sounds to me like being true to yourself, which is what assertive communication is. It's to avoid that burnout. You're going to be true to you because instead of going home and thinking about the person who keeps distracting, say something, let it go, and then withdrawing is setting yourself free from it.
Or I think, what also happens, and I didn't hear it so much here, but we think of all these devious plans, nefarious plans to get them to be quiet or get them to, I'm going to move them in this way and I'm going to do this. And I find that exhausting too.
Policing?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't work. And the other thing that I find is that if you talk to them one-on-one, you have more effective results. If you do it in class, their peer network will rally around them. I mean, it's Mother Nature supporting the peer group.
That's social psychology, right? They're not going to say anything because they don't want to be called out themselves by their peers.
That's right.
But
their relationship with their peers is much higher on that grid than the relationship with you, the instructor.
Well, but you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised, I think. Yeah.
And I think just to pick up on what you said, I don't know your name up there, but it's not only being authentic to yourself, but it's being authentic to the other 40, 50, 20 people in your class that are having difficulty learning because of the distraction. So I think it's that authenticity of setting up, this is the framework for the learning in this class, and this is my commitment to you and to the content. And I'll help you get there, but if you're not, you don't have the right to distract 40 other people from their learning.
Right, absolutely. Yeah.
So there was a question, what do we do then if the student goes to student judicial affairs saying, they kicked me out of the class? What should we be doing if we notice consistent behavior in a student? Should we be documenting, just writing it down? Should we tell our chair? At what point should we start some sort of a trail that shows that we've done what we need to do? And, at what point should we refer them? Do we refer them to student judicial affairs when we kick them out of class?
I think those are, go ahead.
Well, gosh, I would hate for you guys to have to you have enough to do than to document. I don't know that I personally don't know. If they're pointing a gun at you or something, okay, document that. But if they're talking in the back of the class and you've had this dialogue, then I think you do have the choice to say you need to stop, or we're going to have a conversation with judicial affairs. Or to call judicial affairs. But I think what judicial affairs would do is they're not going to come and say, Sarah, what's your documentation on this? Can you give me your incident reports about talking in the class? What they're going to say to the student is, I don't care if it's your word against Sarah's. Don't talk in class because you've now been sanctioned. So if you talk in class, if Sarah tells me you talk in class again, then the sanction's going to be worse. I think, judicial affairs is concerned about Title V, and the whole premise of Title V is that preserving the educational environment. And if you're and I think deference is given to you in that case. If you're the instructor saying, I've done this, this, and this, and my learning environment is disrupted, they're going to say to the kid, I don't care if it's your word against them, don't talk. You're done talking.
But I think this is a great conversation. You know, what this is telling me is that maybe the faculty doesn't know how judicial affairs can support them, how they want to be supported by judicial affairs. You know, because I agree. I highly doubt that you guys are going to be kicking students out of your classes right and left. But you want to at least know that somebody has your back, if it comes to that.
Well, okay, so what if there's one of these jumbo classrooms with 150 to 400 students in it, and you hear chit-chatting and you don't know where it's coming from. You don't know who's doing it. And you can't know your students' names. So what recourse do we have in that case? I
mean, again, like I would, for the sake of time, I'll kind of just tell you what I would do. I would, again, say, you know, I don't know, I can't, you know, these big classrooms are difficult in this way for me because I can't like make personal connections with all of you and know what each of you is talking about or what's going on. But I'm hearing a lot of chatter and it's really hard for me to focus and get on with the lecture. So if we continue to have this issue, we're going to have another conversation about this. And I think that's not why you guys want to be here.
Well, and perhaps inviting, you know, if it's only bothering me, then, you know, I'll try and hang with it. But if there are students out there that are being distracted and you want to come talk to me about specific situations, I mean, maybe you
That's
could,
a great one too.
You know, invite the students to
Rallying
participate in it.
allies.
Like, I'm here to support you. I want to tell people to be quiet, but I don't know who y'all are.
Yep.
You know.
That's a great idea, right? Because then, like, what I think that says is we're a community here, people, right? Again, you're impacting people in your community. Because I think, like, this is the disconnect that I'm noticing that students are having. And, you know, whether I think they say it this way or not, they crave it, right? Like, they'll come to counseling and they'll say, none of my professors know me, none of them care about me, you know? And I know for a fact it's not true, right? So but somehow we need to, like, figure out how to make that connection happen. So, yeah.
So we are over time, and we started a little late, and so I was a little lax in shutting us. But you know, we've already had a couple people leave. I want to say thank you so much to Junie for being here.
You're absolutely welcome. I do want to just point out one resource that I didn't have last time. So, do y'all know that there's a faculty and staff assistance program? Like you can get, yeah, of course Bev does. Ask Bev all about it. Is that the phone number? Is that your phone number?
Actually, that is the office phone number, and they can call Dr. Schul directly. They don't have to go through our office, and that keeps it confidential.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if they go to the website, it's got the phone number, directions on how to drive to the office.
Yep, it's great. It's got a lot of information. So, you know, I think a lot of these issues, like, don't minimize them, how they're impacting your life as well, right? And I think it's very important for us to recognize that burnout is something that co-occurs with depression, co-occurs with anxiety, co-occurs, you know, depression is not, I mean, burnout is not just like, oh, I hate my job. Because most of you are here because you love your job, right? So I think we minimize it and we say I'm burned out, but what's happening is that I'm like, over and over again, I'm feeling like I made the wrong choice, or over and over again, I'm feeling humiliated by my students or bullied by my students, or, you know, whatever it is. And I think it can have a significant impact on your functioning. So I highly recommend, you know, we've had some really intense, I've never worked anywhere where we've had so many student deaths in a year. And I know that it's impacting our faculty and staff. And so, you know, we keep saying, oh, we have to remember to tell people that, you know, they have 3 free sessions of counseling available to them.